Chapter 4. I think he has always been there. God is a logical outgrowth of the fact that life fits together as well as it does, but that doesn't mean that we know God's mind. Stephen King. No one seemed to notice when he began his descent from the second heaven. He moved across the vast physical distances in a matter of seconds. As he approached Joe's home, he tried to hide his gargoylean features in the shadows, hoping that nothing would notice him. He was the smallest of them, unseen and immaterial to the humans that abide in the physical world. He drifted over to the house, guided by the darkness, his churning wings quivering in a reddish-gray blur as they thrust him to his destination. He remained floating, carefully watching while sizing up his next assignment, a newborn baby boy. Satan wasn't leaving anything to chance. The best time to ensnare a person was when they were only a babe. Named Smug, due to his highly self-satisfied ego, this wicked, menacing evil spirit appeared bat-like, acting as the guard dog of all things evil. His dragonish body had leathery wings, a long neck, and piercing red pug eyes that bulged out of his face. Smug was edgy and would panic at the least irritation. When enraged, he would spout obscenities, and when in battle, fiery words spewed from his mouth. Christopher Ryan Moretti was born on July 13, 1980, at 3:55 a.m. It was a long and difficult labor. He weighed in at 9 pounds 8 ounces and was 22 inches long. He was a fair-haired, blue-eyed baby. Harassed unseeingly by Smug, Christopher cried every evening for hours at a time. Taking care of a newborn should be straightforward enough, right? Baby cries. Grace and Joe leap to attention to answer his calls. Maybe those cries subside when Grace nurses Christopher, or maybe he is soothed by a diaper change. They felt like they've totally got this, that is, until Christopher won't stop crying. Fortunately, Grandma Ross came to the rescue. Sitting in Grace's old rocker, she would cuddle Christopher and sing him her favorite children's hymn. "Sleep, my child, and peace attend thee all through the night. Guardian angels God will send thee all through the night. Soft the drowsy hours are creeping, hill and vale in slumber sleeping. Love alone its watch is keeping all through the night. Angels watching ever round thee all through the night. In thy slumbers close around thee all through the night. They will of all fears disarm thee, no forebodings shall alarm thee. They will let no peril harm thee all through the night." Smug covered his ears and cowered in the corner. Minutes later, a peaceful baby slept in Grandma's arms. The change in routine seemed to do the trick. In the next 4 years, Joe and Grace were blessed with 2 more sons, William and Luke, and with twins, Sarah and Jennifer. You would see them offering gentle cuddles, words of encouragement, and approval with a smile. They avoided comparing their children to one another. They even set aside a time every evening just before bedtime to talk individually with each child. It was a sacred time without everyday distractions. It would be difficult to imagine 2 more loving parents. All the children inherited the family's good looks. The boys were blessed with broad shoulders, big bones, and a heavy jaw, while the twins were petite like Grace. Their children had varied personalities. Joe and Grace celebrated their children's differences and instilled in each child the desire to pursue their own interests and dreams. Christopher was somewhat haughty. William was full of life, while Luke was extremely bright and somewhat aggressive. The twins, Sarah and Jennifer, were very mischievous and were always playing pranks on their brothers. Joe and Grace were extremely permissive parents who basically let their children do pretty much what they wanted. Love abounded. Rather than disciplining her children, Grace preferred to use bribery, gifts, and trips to the Joe's Candy Cottage — no, Joe was not the owner — and Manhattan Toy and Variety Store to motivate them. Without any boundaries, their children were always getting into trouble. They never asked permission to do anything. As an only child, Grace never experienced the challenges of managing young children and found herself completely overwhelmed. Why hadn't Berkeley offered classes on this most important job? How could I ever think there would be any free time to write? Joe and I were crazy when we thought raising kids would be simple. I'd be lucky to have time to write a want ad for the paper. I'm amazed if I take a shower. Luckily, my hair looks okay in a ponytail. Almost the only good thing about being run ragged is that it has been easier to take off all the weight I gained while being pregnant. Why did I think being a mother would be easier than having a career? I'll have to give my parents credit for only having me. Why are my children so difficult to manage? Where do their mischievous thoughts come from? They just seem to come out of the blue. Instead of being managed by their parents, the twins were left to the suggestions of any number of demons' evil suggestions. Smug had invited a few of his friends to live with him. Prankster and Chaos set up shop in the dark recesses of the Moretti home. To help in their mischievous fun, they often held parties to which they invited Disorder, Havoc, and Prankster's little cousin, Mess. The twins were always doing something playful. Just the other day, Prankster and Mess had suggested to Sarah that she should drag a chair over to the kitchen counter and help herself to the cookies that were cooling. Sarah effortlessly climbed onto the chair and retrieved some cookies. While she shoved one into her mouth, Jennifer encouraged her to share the rest of the plate with the neighborhood kids. Returning home, they wiped their chocolate-smudged hands on clean kitchen towels. Entering the kitchen, Grace exclaimed, "Why do I even bother?" Thinking for a moment, Grace suddenly realized this was just one of the trials of having 5 active young children. Oh well, that's what washers were made for. Next time, girls, remember to ask before you take the cookies. They were supposed to be for tonight's book club meeting. She sighed, realizing there was no point in being angry. Overly tired and wanting to avoid any additional conflict or outburst of tears, Grace called Joe. Of course, because he felt somewhat guilty for working such long hours and helping so little around the house, Joe always agreed to the little demands Grace placed on him. Now that they were more financially settled, he had hired a cleaning lady who came once a week, a gardener, and a babysitter who let Grace spend Friday afternoon going out to lunch and shopping with her friends. After all, that is what he promised her, a life of ease. It wasn't really that much out of the way for him to stop at Becker's Bakery and get some cookies for her evening meeting. If I add some appetizers and wine from Manhattan Grocers, maybe I can earn some bonus points, even score big when we go to bed. He would leave work a little earlier than usual, but the book club would allow him some time to work in his office while the girls gossiped. Problem solved, at least in Joe's mind. The antics of their children grew and became legendary. Joe was often absent attending to business when the children were young. Thus, Grace played a key role in the children's upbringing. At times, she would criticize Joe for being too demanding on his sons and too permissive with the twins. "Grace, you have to understand that boys are different from girls. They need more discipline or they will get into trouble. At times, I worry about their mischievous ways." Scowling, with a few tears welling in her eyes, Grace snapped back, "It appears to me you are wearing blinders. Your daughters seem to get into more trouble than your sons. But how would you know? You are always off working." He used to say I was the first thing he thought of when he woke up. When we would hold hands, it seemed as if our blood flowed together. Spending time with him was like playing at the doorway to heaven. I was in love, and I thought it would last forever. Joe stared out the window at the ocean, arms crossed, face set. Then he laughed his smirky laugh. "Don't you know how much your criticizing hurts me? I'm working all the time for us. Why do you have to be so negative about this? We agreed before we were married that my responsibility was providing for the family, and yours was the children. When they get a little older, you will have your turn." Why does she think that if she demands I come home earlier, I will? If she would just say, "Please come home early tonight," I would. Sometimes she acts like a tyrant. Why does she always make me feel guilty for doing what I know needs to be done? I'm only human. I can't do everything. I don't hate your work. I just hate the fact that I feel such little love and support coming from you. Instead of coming home from work and listening about my day, you always turn on the TV while we are talking. Welcome to the real world of marriage. I guess our desires are different. I want sex, and you are too tired. You would like to visit your parents more, but I don't like wasting all that time. I've so much work to complete. I wish it was just easier. I want it all, but I also want you to be happy. I'll try harder. Maybe your parents could watch the kids for the weekend. Some time off together is just what we need." This intentional act of love ended the bickering. Just knowing that Jo wanted to look out for her interests brought Grace the peace she needed. Jo's love for her had elicited the appropriate response. With her love tank full, Grace felt secure in Jo's love. The whole world looked brighter, and she was able to deal with the antics of her family. The children were all good-natured, rambunctious hooligans and daredevils who loved to have fun. Whenever possible, you would find them wrestling with one another. They were active, combative athletes, little warriors looking for their next adventure. Spending their summers at the beach, they were fabulous swimmers, but even better surfers. They raced in on waves, cutting each other off, knocking each other over, and were often tossed about in the undertow. "Are you all right? That looked rather grueling," one of them would call. They set such high standards for their recklessness that eventually Jo would put his foot down and have them stop before someone got seriously hurt. "If you don't take it down a notch, there will be no video games or television when we get home." Indoor life with them was no less vigorous. The savagery of pillow fighting would leave them all breathless. Every activity they participated in was competitive, and without a doubt it irked the twins who were usually the losers. Star Wars offered a different difficulty. There was only one heroine, and Jennifer and Sarah spent more time arguing over who would be Princess Leia than actually playing. Their number one favorite indoor game was hide-and-seek. More importantly, they all loved each other. Late at night, when they were all in bed, Jo and Grace would hear them calling down the halls with plans for the next day's adventures. Each would dream of the exhausting contests they would encounter the next day. Breakfast was one of the few times Jo was able to eat a meal with his family. Throughout the meal, Jo was able to chat about how everyone was doing and discover who needed his help. Finding a time to have a conversation with the children was a difficult task, especially with their different attention spans and passions. Consistently gathering for meals and intentionally using this time would have made it easier, but Jo found his business demands overwhelming. He was often up and off to work before everyone was awake. In reality, he spent little time with them. He counted on his prayers to keep them safe, but sometimes he worried that the prayers weren't enough. Sitting at his keyboard, Jo reached for the phone to call Grace. As he expected, his daughter answered the phone on the first ring. "Hey, Pop, can I wear lipstick to the football game tonight? All my friends are. Please?" "I'm not surprised. She is almost 13 and in junior high. I'm sure that Grace wore lipstick at that age, but there is no way I want my daughters to start so young. I know the thoughts that run through the minds of young men. Not yet 13 and already it's lipstick at football games." "What did your mother say?" "Said she'd think about it." "Then I'll think about it too." "Oh, Dad." "Put your mom on, Jenny." "Can't you come home so we can talk? I don't want everyone to think I'm a baby." "God save me." "I have to work late. Put your mom on now." Jo could tell that the conversation had annoyed his daughter, but he wished it hadn't. He had to put his foot down sometimes. "Mom, Pop's on the phone. He has to work late. Thanks for the bulletin." Sounding cheerful as usual, Jo wondered, like always, how she could manage their 5 teenage children. "I was hoping you would be home for dinner. Stuck at the office for a while. Can't say how long. Why does Jenny need lipstick?" "Gloss," Grace corrected. "Lip gloss, you know. It's a basic female tool." "Next thing she'll be wanting is a tattoo, and the answer is no. No tattoos." "I think you are jumping a little ahead of things. Relax. We have good kids. I'll save you some leftovers for dinner. We can unwind with some wine and talk about this when you get home." Jo sat for a few minutes in the quiet, drinking his coffee and thinking of Grace and their 5 children. He didn't want his baby wearing makeup, but he knew she would wear him down. The twins were already beginning to develop a sex appeal, a tomboyish type. They had athletic bodies, clear skin, solid curves, and taunting eyes, with a dangerous-looking intelligence and now lip gloss. He was pleased that his daughters were going to be beautiful young women like their mother. As little girls, the most noticeable thing about them had been their angelic blue eyes, surrounded by a mass of blonde curls. But now the curls had become striking locks that fell thickly below their shoulders. Boys were starting to turn and look, just as he had when he was a teen. With a sigh, he booted up his computer to study the details of the project his new business partner had proposed. He spent another hour reading and taking notes. Crew costs had skyrocketed the last few years, and they were trying to find additional ways to increase their bottom line. The daily cost of $53,299 was accounting for about 44% of their total operating expenses. Even though all the information looked good, he felt apprehensive. Would they compromise the quality of their services and potentially lose business? Sometimes he felt William Martin wanted to take potentially high risks that did not merit the savings received. Hidden in the shadows, dishonesty lingered in the corner. He was on a covert mission and had hoped to come and go unnoticed. Spewing whispers from his drooling mouth, an invisible red fog floated toward Joe. Why am I worrying so much? The bottom line is much better than I had anticipated. William is really a magician with numbers. That's why I hired him. I'm just tired and longing to see Grace. It should be a great night. She already said she would have a glass of wine waiting when I got home. I work too much. I think I'll just go home and enjoy my wife. Dismissing his concerns as exhaustion and foolish suspicion, he stored the information on his computer and left the office a little before 9. Joe had started his business career in an office next to his father. In a few short years, he'd received an education that few ever receive in a lifetime. Some of what he learned came from books and some from college lectures, but mostly he learned from his mentors. Chief among them were his father and grandfather. Rule number 1, be in the office by 7. There were deals to be made. Yet part of what he learned came through the cold, hard knocks of experience. To learn, he developed a set of guidelines, the Moretti Rules. The rules, shaped by his larger vision, simply put, make the world a better place. Joe had a vision most found hard to embrace. He never wasted time. He preferred to create. Smart and hard-working, he honored the law. There was no part of the transportation industry that he hadn't mastered. His father often remarked that everything Joe touched would turn to gold. Joe had the Midas touch. His business was built with little more than thrift and creativity. Without a doubt, Joe was a young idealist who, with basic tools and some sound management skills, was shaping his world. Joe's business ventures continued to grow over the years until he needed to hire a vast array of employees. He was the classic definition of the American success story. His increasing reputation, his widening circle of acquaintances, his sense of importance, and the growing pressures built up in him a false sense of arrival. Prosperity had built a self-assuring net around him. He continually set new standards of excellence while expanding his interests nationally and internationally. He was more than happy to be a part of the $375 billion shipping industry that carried 90% of world trade. If all the work wasn't enough, he was also an ardent philanthropist. Joe was personally involved in everything he put his name on. This commitment made him a preeminent developer around the world, but not the best dad or husband.